What is important for a Dungeons and Dragons game? Or any other TTRPG for that matter? Well, first things first, I think you should play in person. There are so many easy ways to play online, but the experience of playing online versus face-to-face is so different. It's so different. It is such a magical and personal experience when you're in a room with other people, eating snacks, and just having a grand old time. You might be saying, well, it's a lot easier to get people together for an online D&D game. That's true, but that doesn't necessarily make it better. There are loads of people in your area, I can almost guarantee it, who want to play Dungeons and Dragons. I live in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of deep Amish country. And I still have enough people to create 2 groups and potentially many more. There are so many people who want to play D&D. They've heard about it in passing, and it's on the periphery of their consciousness, right? And all you have to do is go up to them and say, hey, you want to try this? And guess what? They'll probably say, yeah. There are so many people that want to play D&D, and you should get those people and bring them to your house or go to their house and play in person. It's great. Tactile. Oh boy. There was a problem with people playing on their phones during games. And virtual tabletops are notorious for this, with players doing other things while waiting for combat to resolve or while the DM's talking, because there's a screen in front of them. The way to reduce this, without directly telling the players, even though that helps, is to make the game more tactile. In my case, miniatures were number 1. I thought they were really cool, so I started painting them, and then I got obsessed. But giving things that are cool for the players to look at and touch is perfect. When you place down a new miniature, monster or person, some of the first things players do is reach for it and go, oh, can I look at this? And then they admire it and they're like, wow, that's awesome. They're touching it. It's keeping their attention. Give them things to touch and move around in combat. It really helps. This doesn't just apply to miniatures, though. It's expensive, I get that. So, there are other things. You can use quarters, and then use Sharpies to write what they are on them. Make maps. Get a big old dry erase grid, and make dungeons for them to go through, and use coins to represent monsters. Nice and easy, it's a good solution. But with that, have them make a map, and give them a little bit of XP for making it. I give my players 250, and then 300 when they complete a level. The one player who has the map will be focus traded on it, and it'll be good. They'll make, for one, a really cool map of the dungeon level, and 2, the person who generally volunteers to map make gets really into it. Like, both of my map makers are great. And when I started my second group, I don't know why we hadn't thought of this before. On the dungeon map, when the first character died, he said, hey, do you have like a red pen or something? I want to mark down where this guy died. I was like, oh, that's great. So now our maps are full of these red splotches and the names of the unfortunate dead, as well as how they died. And that has made for some awesome maps to look back on. Engagement. Obviously, this is something we, as referees or game masters, try to achieve. And players, too, I suppose. But a level of engagement where everyone is hopefully having some fun during the session. All of my steps here generally help with that, and it depends from group to group. I'm blessed with amazing players who are super motivated and awesome. Those super motivated and awesome players are once again near you. This ties back to the first 2 topics. Gentlemen and ladies, there are people in the area who want to play, and they're awesome. And give them things to touch, and they'll have a grand old time. Tough. My games are tough. Are they balanced? Hell no. Are they fun? Yes. Imbalance is fun. It is great for a party to go in and absolutely stomp some kobolds when they're high level. And it's also great when the enemies greatly outnumber them or are way more powerful than them. Or both. Both create memorable moments, and both require the players to think to some degree. Imbalance is fun. A lot of people want to try to tinker with it to get encounters just right for their level, and quite frankly, it is such an arduous task with very little payoff, because an even battle is going to take forever. They're going to run from a really imbalanced encounter, or stay and pub stomp the enemies. There is no in-between, and both are great. Why should you trust this old bag of bones here? Well, I've been doing this for about 8 years. 7 of those years have been DMing, and I've been playing in games for all of them. My game was born out of an idea that went something like, I can't criticize DMs, GMs, or referees until I make a game of my own that I feel is better. And I think that I've safely arrived at that point. I have consistent players. My longest game has been going for just about or just over 2 years now. And both my groups seem to be pretty engaged and hooked. So I've made a lot of mistakes, DMing and playing, and I've seen my dungeon masters and game masters do the same. Although we both have had a lot of successes too, and those are things to learn from. Now that I've hopefully had you hooked into this video, I'm going to talk about my keys for success. Key number 1. Run a sandbox game. This is essentially an open world game. That sounds really difficult, but it's not. Create a local area, a small village and a surrounding dungeon or two, a cave, a forest, a field, a small area for the players to wet their toes in before they get into the wider world. Because you can use this to build up lore for the wider world. Just throw in a few NPC names, or like, oh, you're in this nation. It's a lot less work to prepare. Along with that, too, you'll see people complaining about this online, or you'll hear about it in your local game store all the time. And that's that, oh, the players, they went off and did their own thing, and they kind of ruined my story. But it's okay. And it is okay. The players should be able to go off and do their own thing. Listen, Game Masters. It's an unfortunate truth, but if there is a story, the players will break it. But if there is no story, or if the story's in the background, the players will come in and create their own better story. This is a collaborative game, and this is where a sandbox shines. In your little area, maybe there's 1 or 2 bigger bad guys directing lieutenants in smaller dungeons to go raid the town or cause mischief. Well, the players can choose to engage with them if they want, or they could choose to do other things. In any case, there's background story with whatever's going on in the Temple of Elemental Evil, and the village of Hamlet, is kind of stuck in that, but it's up to the players what they do. What I'm getting at is, the players will make their own story, and with your help, it'll be amazing. It'll be so good, and the players will be motivated to do things. Classic archetypes. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have noticed, within media today, there is a lot of, this bad guy is bad, but they have a troubled or traumatic past that has made them this way. I like Frank Horrigan from Fallout 2. He is evil for the sake of evil. He is pure enclave. Classic tropes are not bad. The big dumb ogre who just wants to come into a village, kidnap 3 people and a goat to eat, and smash some heads in on his way out is not a bad trope. He just wants to do that because he's hungry and he felt like it. Let bad guys just be evil, so players can feel good about defeating them. Along with that too, having the classic princess captured and guarded by dragons story, and the players need to go save them. Or even as simple as the blacksmith's daughter has been kidnapped by goblins. Those are classic tropes. And they work. And they're good. Perhaps it's just me missing them, but give them a shot. They generally work out pretty well. Make your own content. Campaign settings are great. However, whatever you're going to make is going to be better. Let me explain. You can do this in a corner of a campaign setting like Greyhawk, or Dark Sun, or Forgotten Realms, Ed Greenwood. Or you could do it in your own made-up world. Both are good so long as you're producing and making your own content, because you will always know your own towns, NPCs, dungeons, enemies, everything better than if you just bought a pre-packaged adventure, and plus it's a good creative exercise. Multiple characters. Hang with me on this one. It'll take a few seconds to explain. So I run a Frankenstein of the 1974 white box edition of Dungeons & Dragons and Moldvay Basic. I have also taken inspiration from a number of other RPGs, including but not limited to Metamorphosis Alpha, the very first science fiction RPG ever created. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. The Dungeon Master's Guide is a holy grail. It is filled with so much knowledge. Good knowledge. I love you, Gygax. Etherscope. I'm not sure how to describe Etherscope, but it's Victorian steampunk aether. It's pretty cool. And of course, Dungeon Crawl Classics. It's Dungeon Crawl Classics. It's a girthy book. It has a bunch of tables. It is 505 pages of pure, concentrated incredible. In any case, my players lovingly refer to my system as 0E. In old school games, you tend to see players having more than one character. And this is a great thing, because we'll get to it in a moment, but when 8 characters go into a dungeon, generally 4 to 6 of them come back out. The rest, not so lucky. But along with that too, it minimizes a phenomenon I see all the time in the newer editions of the game. And you could see it online very easily. It's creating new characters. People are obsessed with it. And rightly so. It's fun to make characters. Especially in 5th edition. There are some people who never play 5e at a table, but they make characters. Because it's a ton of fun. And this, when you have maybe 4 characters each, you don't burn out on one character because you can always switch. You don't have to roleplay them all at once. You switch between these 2, and that's a lot of fun. And if one dies, well, you get to make another, and that's really cool. It's really fun, and it's going to be better than your last one. Having them have multiple characters, especially in these old games since it's so simple to make a character and be a character, it's great. I can't recommend it enough. Death. Oh boy, it irks me a little bit in newer editions of Dungeons & Dragons, but it's incredibly hard for players to die. And I really don't like that, because what are the stakes of the game if death isn't on the table? If the golem doesn't come up and crush your head when you're down, why are you playing? At that point, you might as well all be writing a collaborative novel and not using dice. Dice are there to simulate randomness, and they are there to help the story along. Players need to die. Not on purpose, of course. You don't want to just go killing them willy-nilly for no reason. But if they're fighting a group of gargoyles, and they know they're not going to die, why on earth are they fighting that pack of gargoyles? There should be tension. When they see a statue that resembles a gargoyle, they should be mildly spooked. Because if there's a fight with a gargoyle, there is a chance a player character might die. Tough encounters. This goes along with death. I run very difficult encounters. As I stated earlier in the video, balance should not exist. There are limits to this, of course. Level 1 of the dungeon should be generally geared towards level 1 players, level 2 of the dungeon, level 2 players. But on those layers, on level 1 put a troll. It'll stomp the party, it'll give them something to run from, and it will give them something to plan for and eventually take down, to enter its den and take all its loot. Tough encounters require a suitable reward, however. And this is something that irked me with my past DMs. They wouldn't give very good rewards. I give my player characters, one could argue, too many magic items and too much loot. But when most of your XP comes from gold, that being 1 gold equals 1 XP in this old system, you're motivated to fight monsters. You're not motivated to fight monsters. You're motivated to be smart and use your head to get their gold. However, some monsters you have to fight. And you should feel rewarded for fighting them. Because most likely someone's gonna die. That has a very, very high likelihood. Not a high likelihood, a very, very high one when fighting a tough monster. So when one of their characters dies, that really cool, brilliant fire helm that shoots out laser beams once per turn doing 1d6 damage makes you feel a lot better. Because that's really freaking cool. Or if they manage to get through unscathed, that feeling of elation as they all can claim their cool treasure, nothing beats it. I love watching them after that. I don't give it to them easy, but man, it even feels good for me when I lose. A great DM once said, GMing is losing with style. Many of my players are veterans of the Long War now. They have excellent player skills and intuition. They know me, and they know I'm not going to mess around. Emphasizing player skill versus character sheet skill is incredibly important. I don't have skills in my game, really. A few classes have them, like thieves and rangers. But for the most part, it requires, to be successful in one of my games. You don't so much look at your character sheet, but you use your head and use the surroundings around you. My players have built up a store of knowledge that makes them good players. They know which areas should be generally dangerous, they know what their characters can handle, they know how to interact with people in my world. emphasize the players building their own skills versus just relying on their character sheet. Although, they should rely on their character sheet for a whole host of miscellaneous items that they can pull out and say, hey, can I use this pot to throw on the guard's head and then bang it a few times to try to disorientate him? I will admit, I'm a lot softer as a DM than I make myself out to be whenever I talk about this. Perhaps that's not the right word. I am a referee that is very biased towards the players. If it's awesome, heck yeah, go right ahead. Assuming it's feasible, at least. And generally, the options that they suggest to me are reasonable, because they're good players. It's time to talk about it a little bit. I generally don't like to be too negative. However, 5th edition has to rear its ugly head sometime. I don't hate it. Hate's a very strong word. Do I dislike it? Maybe a little bit. Perhaps the most apt way to say it, and this is stealing a phrase from a good buddy of mine, it is my least favorite TTRPG. I started out in 5e, both as a player and DMing, and I've found it is not very conducive to my style, or how I want to run in games, or even how I want to play in games. I'm not the biggest fan of playing in a 5e game. There are a lot of complaints thrown at 5th edition. And I think the simplest one that's a catch-all for everything is 5th edition is a one-sized glove that tries to fit all. In reality, it's only a small glove that can be worn by a select few. It tries to do everything, but in doing so, it does nothing particularly well. You could try to fix it by homebrewing, a nasty word, by making house rules that attempt to correct its shortcomings, but that's generally going to build up player resentment, as they like what's written down in the rules in their player's handbook. Well, the rules are in the player's handbook, not the DM's guide. They like their rules, and having them changed, having a heavily modified 5e game generally will build up Jeepers! A little ladybug just landed on me. Done flew away! Having a heavily modified 5e game will generally build up some resentment, because so many systems get swapped around, abilities get broken, and players get a little annoyed. It's small annoyance, but eventually it'll build up. It's a system you can't fix, no matter how hard you try. I highly suggest migrating to other systems, because there are so many good RPG systems. You just gotta go out and look for them. Or play any of the ones I just suggested. Along with that too, the other big problem with 5th edition is the rules are player-facing, and the players have almost all the power. All of the rules are geared towards helping the players do shenanigans to get over the DM's head. Not always in a fun way, but it gets tiresome really quick. Do you know how many stories I've heard about a group of people that massacre an entire orphanage in town and then ride away on a stolen cart and how awesome it was? For a first game, I will admit it's pretty cool, but I've heard the story so many times that it seems to be a symptom of 5e. Those situations I don't particularly like. It takes a lot of power away from the GM, and that's not good. The referee is the world. They are the player's connection to the world. And if they don't have adequate power to keep their world, and to a certain extent wrangle the players from doing too much wild shenanigans, and by wild shenanigans I mean something like praying to the gods, rolling a nat 20, and then having a holy beam wipe out every single enemy, even though they're like level 2. It's not good. But enough of this negativity. Run games. This advice works really well. I've found it to work really well. I have passed my knowledge on to 2 other DMs. They're essentially my dark apprentices. I am Darth Gamus, and they're both Sith assassins, I suppose. I don't think they've reached the rank of Dark Lord yet. But they're well on their way. They've grown a lot, even though they haven't been DMing for a while. So, with 2 success stories, admittedly that's not a big data pool, I'm going to assume that these ideas, my RPG philosophy, will work well for you. And I want you to have a game where you are having a lot of fun, where your players are having a lot of fun, that is a good experience and a great memory. A living game that is beyond whatever your expectations were for it originally. But with that, I really hope you have found at least one thing you can take away from this. And I'll catch ya in the next one.